where you dropped us off?
So, good afternoon.
In front of the arch?
Thank you for coming.
Okay, about
I see some
3:35?
familiar faces
Okay.
who've been following
All right,
Earth
okay.
Democracy along in this
Maybe 3:35.
convention. And I really appreciate
Okay.
your attendance at our
Okay,
events
great.
here.
I'll see you then.
We have quite a large panel. I would like to say that maybe like me, some of you who aren't Wisconsinites have a view of Wisconsin as a beautiful rolling green hill landscape with trees, lakes, beautiful rock outcroppings, and cows, dairy cows. And the more I began to learn about what was going on in Wisconsin, the more I learned that Wisconsin is like many other states, under corporate attack in the resource extraction of much of the wealth of Wisconsin's resources. And the one that I really was shocked to learn about, because I've been fighting fracking in California, and we all know about what's been happening in Pennsylvania and New York, was that actually there's a very great need for a particular kind of sand used in fracking, and that's actually absolutely decimating many communities in Wisconsin. So we'll be hearing about that from Patricia Popple. We'll be hearing from Carl Sack about how local activists in Madison act as support people and community allies with the communities that are actually engaged in the fight back in their local areas across the state. And Sherri Mitchell, who's from Maine, will be complementing Peter Anderson in terms of looking at the issues of pipeline and oil and natural gas transportation and the threats of rupture and the kind of climate, environmental devastation that can bring to local communities and the environment and nature. And Ruth will be talking about, are you going to talk about the East-West Highway too?
Some.
Yes, about this East-West Highway planned in Maine that is a threat to communities and indigenous people, but it's a threat because it is a way that cross-border trade will begin to take place, and the threats of multinational corporations lodging trade suits perhaps against the U.S. because of the kinds of regulations that they are opposing that would curtail their trade. And Daniel Lee is going to talk about nuclear power relationships from the local to the global, and how we can't just look at what's happening in our local territory, our local community, but we really have to broaden this out. So the hope in this panel discussion is to learn from the community fightbacks, sort of what best practices are now, from their experiences, what we might begin to list as sort of best practices, so that we can all learn from their struggles to apply to our struggles as we confront them in our communities. And then to look at, from the local struggles, how to build regional coalitions and grow the movement outward from the local to the regional to the state level, to the regional level then, and then globally. Because if we don't do this, if we don't coalesce, if we don't collaborate, if we don't cohere and convene these efforts together, we're really not going to win against the corporate attacks, and we're not going to win against the global climate attack. So I'm going to let people introduce themselves very briefly.
She didn't mention that.
And then there'll be about 10-minute.
I think that I would do a better job just giving an overview of what I Don't Know More is about and how it started.
Okay, why don't you do that? That'd be
Okay.
very good. Sure. So Sherri will introduce us a bit to the Idle No More movement as an introduction to the panel, and then we'll proceed. I'd like Patricia to follow you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you being here. in looking at this very broad panel, it seemed like a good idea to give some history on the movement, how it started, because not everybody knows what Idle No More is, how it began. Idle No More essentially is a grassroots movement that rose up among some Indigenous or Aboriginal women in Saskatchewan in response to these real last century apartheid type policies against First Nations people in Canada. And so Jessica Gordon, Sylvia McAdam, Sheila McLean, Nina Wilson, and Erica Lee were the women who originally started the Idle No More movement. And what they did was they started gathering information and doing these teach-ins in local communities to educate people about the things that were going on under the Harper administration. Some of the things that are going on up there are extremely disturbing. They really are genocide type programs. This is the modern day apartheid is going on in Canada. And most people don't know that the policies of apartheid actually originated with Indian Act policy and American Indian policy, both out of Canada and the US. So, you know, it took 50 years for people to get rid of apartheid in South Africa. And apartheid has been going on against the Indigenous people in this country for hundreds of years, and it's still an ongoing process. This, I think, is probably the most dramatic attack against Indigenous people that we've seen in a very, very long time. So what the Harper administration is doing is he is coercing the First Nations people into signing these tripartite agreements. And so initially, there's a series of negotiations. He's created this negotiations table, and it has, you know, like 93 different negotiation tables to get them to sign agreements that essentially abolish all of their land rights, all Aboriginal title rights, and eliminates their status as First Nations or Aboriginal peoples. So essentially, they're signing an agreement to say we will no longer have the status of Indigenous peoples. And for those who do not sign these agreements, there is a cut in funding so that the community only gets $500,000 a year. And so you can't run a grocery store on $500,000 a year, let alone a community. And so the response to that has been this huge media campaign about Indian welfare that's going on. What they don't tell you is that De Beers and all of these other corporations are literally extracting billions of dollars worth of resources off from the lands that are owned by these people. The reason that these agreements are needing to be signed is because the Indigenous people do have title rights to those lands. And so that's the purpose of the tripartite agreements. They also changed a number of laws to make it easier for Canada to dispossess the Native peoples of their lands. They unilaterally have changed treaty agreement numbers, so it used to be if 50% of the population voted in favor of selling the land, then that agreement could move forward. Harper's administration just unilaterally changed it down to 25%, and with no input from the Native peoples in the area. He also eliminated their access and their right to clean drinking water under the Clean Drinking Water Act for First Nations people. He deregulated over 600 waterways, took away their environmental protections. I mean, the list is huge. It's really a multi-tiered attack against the people to starve them out, to prevent them from having access to clean drinking water, you know, and to essentially eliminate all of their status as First Nations people. If you were in here in the first session, I talked about the importance of allying with Indigenous peoples because Indigenous peoples are in possession of some of the last untouched lands on the planet. And so this is why this is going on, because these administrations and these corporations are well aware of the fact that the last untouched lands that they could have access to belong to the Aboriginal Indigenous peoples. So this broad-scale attack against Indigenous status or Aboriginal status in Canada is really a strategic plan to eliminate all rights that the people have to the land in order to finally have access to all of the lands that remain. And so that's where Idle No More rose up out of, was from the people coming up and starting to educate people in their communities through these teach-ins, because there's a complete media blackout about what's going on, and you're going to hear stories about individual efforts from all of these people. I don't need to tell you my stories again, but I think it's really important to understand that all of these attacks are part of a broader, large-scale strategic plan to eliminate that Aboriginal status so that there are no protections from the land, which is why it becomes very, very important at this point in time to ally with Indigenous peoples, because we're the ones that possess the statutory, the treaty, and the Aboriginal title rights to the lands. And so we actually have legal standing to challenge some of these activities, but we need to have the support of allies. So I'm going to sit down now and let all of these fine folks tell their stories, so thank you.
Thank you so much for that review. That really helped me a lot too. I'm Patricia Popple, and I am from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Chippewa Falls and have lived actually in Chippewa County all of my life. I was a school administrator for 31 years and taught the rest of the time. So finally retired with 37 years of experience. I have been working with frac sand mining in Chippewa County particularly because that was the beginnings. The beginnings took place in Chippewa County. Although there had been one frac sand mine developing in the Dunn County, actually the promise on the part of the company, Fairmont Minerals, was to use it for glass making for Cardinal glass. And most all that sand was to go there. Actually now it's going to the frac sand industry, and although they tell us that 60% of it is still going to glass making, we know that the sand in that particular mine, it has a lot of iron in it, so it doesn't produce the sand or the glass that they would like. I brought with me in my car this huge map of Wisconsin, which includes some of the counties in northwest Wisconsin. It was produced by the Department of Transportation, but it was just too big to travel along the streets in Madison. So I didn't bring it in. Maybe tomorrow I could bring that, but it shows whereas in Chippewa Falls we were planning that there was an announcement in the paper that said we would have a processing plant coming into our city, into the city limits. Quietly they annexed the land from the town of Eagle Point into the city limits of Chippewa Falls, 105 acres, and they zoned it heavy industrial. They always wanted heavy industrial in the city. So everybody was really taken aback because they announced that it was going to not only be the processing plant, which would process 2.6 million tons per year of silica, if you can imagine, but also the mine, which would consist of two mines, would be 15 miles away, so they have to haul all this sandstone into the city limits of Chippewa Falls for processing and so on. Some of you may not know exactly what sandstone looks like, but this is a piece of sandstone that is the type that would be used in being broken up and used for frac sand, which is used in the hydraulic fracturing industry. I have a couple of samples. This particular sample of the processed sand, I was told, was just regular sand. After it was dried, this was by the mayor, of course. Oh, that's just regular sand. And they were transloading in the neighborhood area, and it was wet, but he thought it was just sand. Well, it is absolutely frac sand, and it's a different color. Perhaps it hasn't had as much of the color or the iron or whatever taken out. But this is the Great Northern sand that they're looking for hydraulic fracturing. So if any of you want to take a look at this later, you're welcome to do that. It's the stuff that's here, except that there's a glue or cement that holds the sandstone, the pieces together of silica, and actually that glue is quite dangerous because it holds the respirable crystalline silica that we're so fearful of as we work on this. I'm going to just cover it because these things give off emissions into the air. I brought with me 3 pictures, and I don't know if you can see these or not. They're probably best held up, and maybe you just want to hold them up. The one in the middle is the processing plant in Chippewa Falls. In that plant, you will see, I think you can see 2 sand piles, I hope.
Yes.
These pictures were taken by Jim Tittle in 2012, and already the expansion that has gone on is quite remarkable. The processing plant, as you see it here,
Can you hold it up, please?
it is owned
Oh, I'm
by-
sorry. Is that better?
It's now owned by EOG Resources, which was formerly Enron. And the stock market has just gone up. I've been watching the stock market on their oil and gas. They're just making money rolling over right and left because they're a vertically integrated company. So they're taking all the sand out of the hills and then sending it right into either North Dakota or Texas, most likely anyway. We don't hear too much from them. But you will see there a transload station, and they own 900 rail cars. And as I said, this plant can produce 2.6 million tons per year. The other mine that I see that's off to the right is the Superior Silica Sand Mine, and that is north in the town of Auburn in Chippewa County. Now we have 11 sand mines in Chippewa County. We thought we were going to have a couple. We have 11 now, and it didn't take very long for these things to move on. But that particular one, they added multiple acres, and they had to go through a permitting process. And if you ever go, and if you really want to see frac sand mining at its probably worst, you might say, you might go to that mine because you can stand at the town hall and look over across this mine. These huge digging pieces of equipment look like miniature toys, roaming over the hills and so on, because they've really expanded there. I think they've more than doubled the size from the beginning. This one is in the town of Cooks Valley. It's called the Chippewa Sands, and it too is expanding. They own a lot of land all the way around. They had the first permitting. They can continue to take without any additional permitting unless they decide it's going to be a huge acreage that they hadn't had permitted before. So with that background, by the way, I just might say that the processing plant in Chippewa County, or Chippewa Falls, we've been watching this because a year ago, they went to the city council for a change in the conditional use permit. And they wanted to put a huge concrete dome over these 2 piles. Each one of them would be covered in a huge concrete dome that would have electricity in it. So, and their main reason was that they didn't want this sand to freeze in the wintertime, so that they could carry this stuff out 24/7, 365 days out of the year. Well, they finally now, I noticed one day that there wasn't a pile there, and now, just yesterday, I had a report from a friend that they have actually put up one of the domes. I think it's probably a manufactured dome. I don't know that it's concrete. I'm going to have to go out there and take a look at it, and I'm sure they're going to do the other one. The major reason was because they didn't want the sand to freeze, and yet they also added on that they didn't want to have erosion from these huge piles, because in the summertime when it's dry and everything, this silica just rolls off. I mean, it's just huge amounts. They also didn't want the erosion, but they also didn't want it. They thought it would reduce the emissions. And remember, I don't know that you can see too much in the way of residential, but off to that far end is a huge residential area. And they moved into that area saying there were no residences around, but if you know anything about silica, it's very dangerous and very hazardous to the human, and animals as well. So you can put them down and go just pile them someplace, as I know some of the reasons. The picture is not pretty. And as I said before, Wisconsin has well over, I think it's 115, but I'm not even sure because the Department of Transportation can't count them, and the DNR cannot count them as well because they're in 115 mines. because they're in the various stages of permitting. And it's quite disconcerting because most of I call these people predators, and there are many different companies that have come in now since this particular one moved into Chippewa Falls. But they come in the dark of the night, so to speak. They look at farmers who may not be the wealthiest and may be actually quite naive. They are working with town boards that are unzoned, and many of these town boards consist of 3 to 5 people. And they're probably the greatest thing that they've done is put in a new color in their town, you know. And now all of a sudden, they have to try to figure out what they can do to protect the health, safety, and welfare. And that's been very hard to come by. We figure that there have been some promises made. We know that some people have gotten jobs with the sand mining companies, but we don't know yet of any exchanges of money or gifts or anything like that. Although one attorney told me, he said, you know, lots of people will do anything for a Thanksgiving turkey. And I think that may be, you know, the size maybe of some of the gifts. I don't really know. There are hundreds of trucks, actually 1,100, oh wow. There are 1,100 trucks that come into our city and then go back again to the mines. So we have lots of truck traffic and lots of rail traffic. I've been on the ground floor with the community issues. We've done everything that we could in the last 5 years. I headed up the concernship with citizens. We went to the Save the Hills Alliance. I began to connect with people because there were so many people. I mean, we have people now in Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, in Illinois. I've talked to probably all of them. And I've connected with fine groups like Midwest Environmental Advocates, the Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice, SOUL, and many other networking opportunities throughout the United States. My interest has been in hydraulic fracturing because the people who are involved in that are tremendously they're endangered in many ways, with water, air quality, and so on. I always tell the people it's 1 step forward and 4 steps back, but you have to really keep working and fighting for what you believe in terms of the people that you love and so on. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Strong tax base is the argument, and we continue to work on that. But you know, the power is in the people, and forming alliances is just tremendous. I think our group got the DNR to do a silica study. We submitted a rules petition to the state, which they denied. Dr. Tom Power from the University of Montana did a serious study on the economics of frac sand mining. We've had Dr. Crispin Pierce doing air monitoring, and we've had actually air monitors set up with our own local group. But we need to work on a documentation program to document violations so that we can have a history and have them for reference purposes. In 50 years from now, we don't know whether we'll have any hills left. We have to look at messaging because certainly the sand mining companies are really into messaging, and we have to figure out what's our best frame and how we can approach the messages that go out to people. Signage is absolutely crucial. Sand companies hate signs. And so that, it gives them a bad reputation, and they don't want a bad reputation. Another area that we're looking at is the activism in the community with the CELDEF program. But education, no doubt, is the key to all of this because we all started out with no knowledge of any of it. And the learning curve has been very steep. For the people who have now more recently come into this issue, I hope that I and some of the others have helped to decrease that learning curve so that they could be on the business of looking at ordinances and so on. And every day there's something new. A new ordinance is developed that passes muster. So, 2 minutes? Still 2 minutes?
No, you're
finished.
When I showed it to you, it's
right
yeah.
at 2 minutes.
No,
So
could you wrap up very quickly?
I will, yes. it's a catch-up process for all of the Wisconsin governments. There have been workshops held and so on, but there are no pretty pictures in frac sand land, and the jury is still out. We have to find power in citizens and governmental workers from the continued unprotected actions from the mining, oil, and gas companies, the MOG.
Thank you, Patricia. Carl, would you like to introduce
Sure.
yourself and go?
Sure, I'm going to stand up. My name is Carl Sack. I am a resident of Madison. Before moving to Madison 2 years ago, I lived up in the Duluth area, and before that in Ashland. So I'm very familiar with the Lake Superior area, and it's partly why I'm involved in the fight I'm involved in. Let me start by saying that treaty rights are human rights. Treaty rights are our rights. I'm not a Native American, but I have come to recognize that in a lot of situations in an environmental context, like we're dealing with on this panel today, treaty rights are one of the only bulwarks, or one of the strongest bulwarks, that we can use to protect the land from the MOGs and the extractive industries that want to come in and take it over. Where they exist, it's very, as Sherri said, it's very important to ally ourselves with Native American groups who are fighting for their rights. I'm going to start with a minute of history. In this state, in Wisconsin, there was mining. There was lead mining in this part of the state in the 1800s. There was iron mining in the Gogebic Range up north, where I'm going to talk more about today. All of that mining petered out by the 1960s, except for one mine in Jackson County near Black River Falls, which was an iron mine, lasted until about 1975. So there was a gap there in the mining industry, right when the environmental movement was getting going, and right when there was a fight over treaty rights in Wisconsin. The Ojibwe tribes, federally recognized tribes in Wisconsin, fought for their right to hunt, fish, and gather in the ceded territories, off reservation and out of season, which had been guaranteed to them in the treaties they signed between 1837 and 1854 with the U.S. government. They won that fight. They won those rights. They had to defend those rights at the boat landings against angry white mobs. They did so. But in the same time, starting in the late 70s, mining companies came in that were interested in exploiting sulfide minerals in northern Wisconsin. That's copper, zinc, platinum, palladium, gold, silver, things that were buried in sulfide rock. The tribes pivoted 90 degrees to form an alliance, or 180 degrees to form an alliance with sportsmen's groups, some of whom had previously opposed them, to fight off these mines. There was the Flambeau mine, was the only permitted mine out of that period, and it was much smaller than originally planned. It lasted for 4 years. The Crandon mine was going to be a huge mine for sulfide minerals along the Wolf River in northeast Wisconsin. 2 times, the Mole Lake, Sakagogan, Chippewa fought off that mine along with white environmentalists and sportsmen allies who were concerned that it was going to destroy the wild rice along the Wolf River in the Wolf River watershed, and it was going to pollute drinking water for people in eastern Wisconsin. Those alliances managed to fight off the mine, and in 1998 a law was passed in Wisconsin that we call the Prove It First Law, or the Sulfide Mining Moratorium, which says that company cannot put a sulfide mine in this state without first providing an example of a mine that's been open for 10 years and one that's been closed for 10 years without generating acid mine runoff, acid mine drainage pollution, which is sulfuric acid that comes from big mining projects, any type of big mining projects, sulfide mining especially, but also iron mining, coal mining, you name it. And to date, no examples have been put forward. And Wisconsin was, until recently, ranked dead last in the list of good places to mine. That the global mining industry actually keeps a list of places that are good to mine and bad to mine, and we were way down at the end of the list. So in that context, in 2004, a company called RGGS Land and Minerals, which had previously purchased the land in the old Gogebic Range, that a lot of which had been previously mined with shaft mines until the 1960s, announced they were looking for an investor to build an open pit mine. In 2010, they found an investor named Gogebic Taconite, which is a subsidiary. It's not really a subsidiary, but it's owned by Christopher Klein, Klein Resources. Christopher Klein, who is a Florida billionaire, who also owns longwall coal mines in southern Illinois and a mountaintop removal site in Appalachia. Where do they want to put the mine? Here we are in Madison. The mine would be in Ashland and Iron counties up by Lake Superior. Thanks. It's in the Lake Superior watershed. All of the water from this site drains north into the Bad River Indian Reservation and out through the Bad Kakagan Sloughs, which are the largest wetlands complex on Lake Superior, and they're the largest wild rice beds in North America. They provide wild rice for the Bad River Ojibwe. It's a sacred food, very important to feeding people there, many of whom are very poor, and also to income, as they sell it for income. This mine would eventually be 22 miles long. What they are working on right now is phase 1, which is 4.5 miles long here. You can see it here. And up to half a mile wide, and it would be up to 1,000 feet deep. It would be an open pit mine. Open pit mining, there was one small open pit mine in western Michigan on this iron range, but other than that, it hasn't really been tried here because this particular iron deposit dips very steeply into the earth, and it's been uneconomical until recently to get it out. It's still questionable how economical this operation would be. But Gogebic Taconite has done such shoddy work in every phase of their permitting process that they don't seem to be very smart about what they're doing, let's put it that way. The reason they've gotten this far is because they've greased the skids with plenty of cash to the governor and legislators. Thank you. So this mine, in addition to potentially ruining the surface water of the watershed, that is the recharge zone for the Pinocchio Aquifer, which provides groundwater for wells throughout the northern part of Ashland County and on the Bad River Reservation. And those, 1,000-foot deep pit where there's currently a 1,600-foot high range of hills will undoubtedly impact that. In addition, they would be blasting using as much explosives as the explosives that would be equivalent in their power to a Hiroshima bomb every 10 days. There's asbestiform minerals in the rock, which Gogebic Taconite denies, but they're there. That would cause mesothelioma among workers and potentially local people. So in the 2 minutes that I have left, what are people doing about it? By the way, there's literature over there at that table, which feel free to pick up. There's some frac sand mining as well as iron mining stuff, and information about our local group we have here in Madison called Madison Action for Mining Alternatives, which has been working on both frac sand and the Pinocchio mine. Right now, we've been very busy supporting the Bad River tribe. The Bad River Ojibwe have been very out front in opposing this mine, and they have gotten every other tribe in Wisconsin to support them. Last week, the Ho-Chunk the president of the Ho-Chunk tribe was up at the site and planted the Ho-Chunk flag there and gave a sizable donation to the effort. And every tribe in Wisconsin is unified against this mine because they see it as genocidal. They see it as an attack on their treaty rights, their attack on their environment, and literally that it would mean the death of the Bad River Ojibwe, because they wouldn't be able to sustain themselves with their resources taken away by this mine. There's a harvest camp. So we in Madison have been doing everything we can in terms of writing to media, holding fundraisers, holding public events. We will have a fundraiser on September 15th at 7 o'clock at the First Unitarian Church on the west side of town. Can't say exactly what the program is going to be yet, but look for that, preliminary notice. We also have been sending people up north. The best thing we can do right now, if we're from other parts of the state, is to go see that place, to go witness the site. This poster over here shows the Tyler Forks River. That's at the eastern end of the mine site. There's a beautiful canyon, a sheer canyon that this river goes through, right next to the mine site. There is something, the Lakudere tribe, in support of the Bad River Ojibwe, set up what they're calling a harvest and education camp. Some of you, if you're from Wisconsin, might have heard about it. It's been in the news lately. They had a little bit of a fight with the county over permits. It seems like it's blown over for the time being, and they will be staying there indefinitely. But it's open, it's a campsite. It's open for anyone to come and visit, to see what's going on there, to see the site, to get taken on tours, to learn about the science that's there, and to witness what's there that could be lost. We've been trying to put the word out to go there and to see the site. That is the best thing to do. Find your way sometime this summer or this fall when you have a free weekend. Find your way to Mellen, M-E-L-L-E-N, Mellen, Wisconsin. Turn east on Highway 77. Go 5 miles, you'll cross the border into Iron County. Go another 2 miles, you'll see a big sign on the side of the road, a big wooden sign that says Iron County Heritage Area. It's got like a saw on it. Right at that sign, turn right on Moore Park Road. Go half a mile down that gravel road and you'll see the camp. Go there anytime. You don't have to call ahead. There will be people there. There's food. There's a place to camp if you want to camp. And there's the river to swim or to fish. And there's the site. And thanks.
Sherri, would you like to continue?
Oh, sure. I really, I've told a lot of stories this morning about the things that are going on. There's just a couple of things that I want to talk about why do people care, because this seems to be kind of like the local efforts, things that are going on. Why should people care about the Idle No More movement? The Idle No More movement that originated out of the First Nations communities. Because the things that are going on there are spilling into, literally, our local communities. The big oil spill in Kalamazoo, that was one of those projects that came through Canada into the United States, and there have been many others, and it's only the tip of the iceberg. And so another thing that I think is really important for people to know as we start talking about some of the tar sands movement is that they changed the law so that what qualifies as oil is a certain chemical compound. And so when you add bitumen to the oil, it's no longer considered oil, and it helps to push the oil through the pipelines. So if you have a huge spill of this tar sands oil that contains bitumen, there's no real requirement to clean it up like you would an oil spill because it's no longer considered oil because of the chemical makeup is different. So, there are just so many different things that we could talk about that are related to these types of things. And I mentioned that, there have been over 600 waterways that have been deregulated in Canada, and the Minister of Transportation has been given the authority to rubber stamp these oil and gas company projects without any type of environmental impact study or any type of regulatory requirements being met. And so I talked about in one of our earlier sessions, we all know that the Oglala Aquifer is drying up, the Colorado River Basin is drying up. The Oglala Aquifer provides water for 2/3 of the country. The Colorado Basin, there's a 7-state agreement for the water that comes out of that area. And so you're talking about a huge chunk of this country that is going to be in danger of not having any water, which means you can't flush your toilet, which means you have no water to drink, which means, you know, you're going to be living in a mess and you're not going to be able to survive for very long. And so all of the water that exists currently that, you know, is in the Northeast and up in Canada. And so everybody needs to be really concerned about what's going on there, because without clean drinking water, none of us will survive. And so, I mean, I think that's all I really want to add, rather than to talk about individual efforts that are going on, because I really think that it's important for everybody to have time to tell their stories.
Ruth, would you like to share?
Well, I'm here with an organization called the Alliance for Democracy. And what we say is the issue is not the issues. The issue is the system of corporate and money power. And I would say increasingly the attacks on our freedom of speech and assembly and on our very right to protest the assaults on Mother Earth. And I think the stories that everyone is saying, the stories, Sherri, that you've said earlier, what we know, what is going on in the attacks on indigenous communities, but in all of our work, brings out this very, very fundamental point. And so it requires us to have great courage as we fight back. It requires us to shape our campaigns so that they go after the root causes, and also realize the motto of the global economic justice movement, which is, our world is not for sale, another world is possible. So if we frame our fights in these terms, then no matter what specific issues we work on, we're building the kind of resistance that's required. And you know, in some ways this comes as a relief, because we're hit all the time. I mean, I hear your stories and I'm sick. And I know that there's those stories in every state, all around the country, in every country, all around the world. And we get hit and hit and hit until we've been hit so much that you're almost incapacitated. Because, you know, I want to jump up and work on this. I want to jump up and work on these other things, but we can't work on everything and be effective. So we have to make some choices about what we're going to work on. And so part of that choice that we make is how we do our work. Not just what we do, but how we do our work. And the power of the corporation, which has been described here, how they just come in and trample, is really at the root of it. And so, and also money. I mean, I don't want to let Wall Street off the hook, okay? So how do we do our work to go after the very root of corporate power? I was doing a lot of work in the international trade and right to water movements, and I ended up focusing in on water. And I think, Sherri, the kinds of things that you said, you know, that we're all going to die if we don't have water. I found that when I talked about water, it reached people's hearts and souls in ways that other issues didn't reach them, and therefore it helped me to talk about some other things as well that I wanted to talk about. So I had been at the meeting in Cochabamba, Bolivia on rights-based law and on climate change, and I've often told the story of the revolution in Cochabamba. Probably a lot of you know, where the people in the city went onto the streets to stop the privatization by Bechtel Corporation, where they even thought they owned the rain. And it was a story I was telling over and over, and then I had to say, but what am I doing home? It was almost like an appropriation of somebody else's story to be telling this story, and then to say, but it's a great story and it's fantastic what they did, but what am I doing? And so I started working on laws that are based on fundamental rights. This came out of work by the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. I won't talk a lot about it here, I just want to sort of mention it. So the idea is that towns have a fundamental right to self-governance. Fundamental right to self-governance. And corporations do not have a right to the kinds of constitutional rights that the courts have conferred on them. Through Santa Clara's the one that most people know. There's a whole bunch of court cases. And therefore, towns can say in law that we have a right to self-governance, and corporations in our town have no constitutional rights. That's taking on settled law. The town that I first worked in is Barnstead, New Hampshire. And when the attorney Thomas Lindsay was, I won't tell the whole story now, I'm going to do it in the next forum, but said to the chair of the select board, you're taking on settled law, i.e. all these Supreme Court decisions, if you go ahead with this kind of a rights-based ordinance. He said, Mr. Lindsay, I understand, but we will walk point with you. This is a Vietnam veteran who knows when you walk point, you go ahead and flush out the enemy. We will walk point for you on this. A Republican who voted for Bush was able to say this and meant it, and that town passed an ordinance like this by a vote of 133 to 1. So I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the next session. The larger part of framing things in this way around these local right to self-governance is to get enough of these local ordinances, and they can be on water, they can be on fracking, they can be on mining, they can be on anything. It's the way you frame what you're doing to assert the rights of the community, take away the rights of the corporation. If you get enough towns standing up and having the courage to pass ordinances like this, then you go after the state constitution. Then you're ready to change the state constitution. And if we can get some state constitutions changed, maybe then we will have the kind of grassroots power across this country to take on the U.S. Constitution. This isn't easily done. It's not done tomorrow, but it drives deep the roots that we need and the courage that we need to take the power away from the corporations. The other thing that I want to mention is a campaign that Sherri and I are very familiar with up in Maine. There is a employee-owned corporation, an ESOP called Chimbro, that wants to build a super highway across Maine. And we think that it's probably going to be a public-private partnership, but they're dancing all around this. And supposedly, you didn't see Sherri's map last time, but Maine has a big thumb sticking up into Canada. Here's New Brunswick, here's Quebec, and here's Maine sticking up here. So this highway would go across the thumb of Maine and be a shortcut for Canadian huge trucks, okay? But it wouldn't be economic just for trucking. So the head of this corporation slipped one time and he called it a super corridor. I think he's always regretted having said that once, because we heard him. And so fracking, you talked about fracking. There's fracking in Canada being developed at both ends of this highway. So it could be a corridor for the natural gas from the fracking to go along here. And I don't do PowerPoint, I didn't have a map with me, but you may have read about the new pipeline for the Alberta tar sands, you know, with all of the trying to stop it going south. Now they want to take it going east to the Atlantic coast. Well, it would go up and around Canada through all of the indigenous lands. So they're going to fight back.
They are fighting both.
They are fighting back. But it would be a nice shortcut to just take it along this super corridor right through Maine. So we're now organizing against that as well. It's also for getting stuff, goods, from the ports on the Atlantic coast all the way through to the Midwest, up into Canada. And so the whole effort of thinking about another kind of an economy. We have a very broad coalition that includes a lot of local farmers. There was a big story in the New York Times this past summer, you know, quoting one of the local farmers. You have a big super corridor going through, how do you get your food to market? Even the lumbermen, who often are not on our side, say, how do we get our lumber to market if you have this big super corridor going through? We have some very interesting allies in this. The coalition goes from Earth First to the Tea Party. It does. It does. And it's very, very important when we're organizing locally to get to know people and not to write them off before we really know where they're coming from, because we can get some very, very important allies. The state legislature passed $300,000 for this private corporation to do a financial feasibility study for this. Nice gift, right?
Yeah, really.
So in our organizing along this super corridor, there were all kinds of people organizing, including Tea Party people. And one of the issues is taking the land by eminent domain. Who got to the crazy Tea Party governor? The Tea Party people in the coalition. And when the state legislature rescinded that money a year later, the governor didn't do anything about it, and the money is not there. So it's very, very important, not only how we frame the issue, but who we look at who can be working with us. In the rights-based ordinances, again, that we started in Barnstead, now there's on water, there's 4 in New Hampshire and 2 in Maine. The 2 in Maine, it was a Tea Party person who was one of the key core of women who got this ordinance through 2 towns, saying corporations have no rights and we have the right to self-governance. Look, there's lots of things that upset me about the Tea Party. All I'm saying is we have to be open. We have to be open. And the broader our coalition is, the more places we can go. So I guess what I just close with is that when it comes to having a sense of place and a sense of community, that unlikely allies will emerge. And we have to organize not just with our heads, but also with our hearts. And we have to be open to these opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Peter?
Thank you very much for inviting me. And in response to what Trish said, I can attest personally, when I was in Fountain City on vacation last year, I saw all these signs protesting this ad. And Carl, in the early 70s, I got past the first mining reclamation law, and my neighbor, Spencer Black, was 10 years younger, got the second one that you're talking about. And it's so great to see here a new generation continuing to fight. And Ruth, I met Ruth 40 years ago, when I was Carl's age, as a head of a scruffy environmental group in Wisconsin, to meet the equivalent scruffy national group. Environmental Action. Before the dinosaurs walked the earth. Well, I do have a PowerPoint. In terms of introductions, 2 years ago, I was a limousine liberal schmuck, part of the environmental movement. Did that come on? Yeah.
I think we need to do something.
It's light.
Could we,
One on the left here. I think it's one.
There.
The shades.
And the environmental movement is built on lobbying, litigation, that kind of stuff, education. And we do all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking in 2010 about what had just happened. In 2009 and 10, the environmental movement spent, some people say about $300 million, some people say as much as $1 billion to pass a cap and trade bill about climate change that got through the House in a form, well, first of all, cap and trade is like tax evasion. It's a bad idea to start with. But the bill that got through would do absolutely nothing and probably make it worse in the House. And it didn't get even a vote in the Senate. And what did the national established environmental groups want to do? After the 2010 election, when the Tea Party swept control of the House, they wanted to double down on the same bad bet again. And that's when, I don't know if many of you here, the very well-known writer Bill McKibben sent a mass mailing out in the spring of 2011, inviting people to change the game and to actually start going away from lobbying in Washington to go into the streets. And after watching Lauren's talk with such a great turnout, it's a journey I'm going to talk about, which many of you guys and gals have already transversed, but please endure with me. Now, climate change is something I'm sure everyone here in this room knows a lot about, but there are three things you may not. The first, in terms of it may look to you like a slow-rolling catastrophe, but the urgency of it is far greater than many people understand. The first one is the atmosphere is like a bathtub. We can't, unlike many other environmental catastrophes, say, okay, next year we'll figure it out, come to our senses, and make everything right. Once that bathtub, once the atmosphere is full, it spills over. There's no more going back. It'll be hundreds, if not thousands of years, once the bathtub is full, before you can ever have a recession from the conditions of the overheating that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will have. There's no going back once you go too far. Also, another thing that people don't always understand is that the stuff you hear about what will happen if we have 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide and so forth, all the things that are being done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change are very conservative. They're just modeling stuff that you hear and read about, which can be very, very carefully quantified. But the stuff that's not easily quantified is a carbon bomb. So in the north, in the Arctic, the temperature increased because the amount of reflection that the ice used to cause is now less. It's magnified. It may be a degree here, Fahrenheit, but it's as much as 5 degrees in the Arctic. And so the tundra, the frozen tundra in the Arctic that surrounds the North Pole, is beginning to melt. And there's 1.4 trillion tons of carbon in that area. And if it begins to melt, if that carbon comes out, if the methane comes out, we're talking about a huge turnover that'll be completely irreversible. Often not talked about. And the third thing I want to emphasize to you about climate change is they say we don't want to go beyond 450 parts per million. That number has no scientific basis. Essentially, it was written when we were about 380 parts per million, and the people in office said, well, the trend line means that'll happen when I'm out of office. So all 450 was I'm out of office number. The real number, according to Jim Hansen, we're seeing in the Arctic today, is 350. I don't think you'll see it. That was in 1990, 43 years ago. 23 years ago. We have to really get our act together urgently. And so sometimes it's said we have 5 years to peak out and not get any more carbon dioxide released, and then 20 years to get completely off it, and maybe even less than that. That's how urgent we have to move. And the political process is simply into transactional politics, will never address that. It's one step forward, 5 steps back. And when McKibben's story was the process of getting us out of the lobbying game into the political direction. So the issue here actually was to talk about is the tar sands in the boreal regions of Canada. It's often called the great lung of North America, exhaling oxygen, inhaling carbon dioxide. But under that beautiful boreal forest in Alberta around Fort McMurray is 55% of the proven oil reserves in the United States. No more than 1/3, even under the most expansive, the 450 parts per million, can possibly be mined. And those are all, I'm not going to have time for it, these are all the various pipelines that want to use, because Alberta is landlocked, they got to find a way to pipe it out. And the one that's gotten the most publicity is the Keystone Pipeline. And interestingly, one hook we're talking about is a right of the tribal communities, but also those pipelines cross the border between Canada and the United States. We happen to have a very interesting law that says when a thing crosses the border, it's a presidential decision processed by the State Department. And the State Department has done 2 EISs so far, both rejected by the EPA, both written by consultants who were previously and sometimes continuously consultants for the Keystone Pipeline companies, which kind of tells you what things are. And what we're doing in terms of the 350.org, joined now by the Sierra Club, very strongly under Mike Gruen's group called Credo, is saying we're going to protest this, we're going to engage, and we're not going to recognize the authority, we're not going to cooperate with this, and we're going to put a stop to it by direct action, by civil disobedience. And when you get down to this, actually Newton was a little bit fob. I don't think he probably saw this use of his word about on the backs of others. The slave trade, of course, was an inspiring fight. The very first fight that the people power was used not to assert the interest of the group itself, but to protect someone else. The slave trade was horrendous. The tortures and the terrible conditions that people lived in who were slaves were beyond belief. And in 1787, 12 men with no power met in an attic over a print shop in London and said, we're going to dedicate our lives to abolishing the slave trade. You've often heard some of the people there like John Newton, the Amazing Grace, the slave trader who saw the light. But the most important person in terms of inspiring us here today was a student, Carl's age. How old are you, Carl?
30.
Well,
30,
he was
probably younger than me.
Thomas Carl Clarkson was 26 years old. He was a privileged member of the elite in England, and he was at Cambridge, and they had an essay contest whether the slave trade was legal. And having never heard of it before, he poured himself into that, wrote an essay, and then on the ride back to his home in Hertfordshire, he had a road to Damascus revelation, said, I got to dedicate my life to it. And he spent the next 25, 40 years, 50 years, spending about 16 hours a day. He traveled 300,000 miles by horseback to start this movement. And actually, interestingly, in the end, the men were willing to compromise. It was the women who came up, and because they were talking about should we use the laws to try and compensate the slave owners? And the women says, compensate the slave owners? What about the slaves? So in 1833, the slave trade was finally abolished, starting with just 12 people in a room. And of course, there's the Indians' revolt, and I want to use this for Gandhi. There's a great speech in here I want you to remember as you leave here. And the sound is not working.
All its modern weapons. When a great power like that
Thank you so much.
strikes defenseless people, it shows its brutality, its own weakness, especially when those people do not strike back. We must have the courage to take their anger.
Capital may go.
Should we issue a warning, sir?
morning? No readings.
And beheaded them. There's the Flint sit-down strike where everyone was heading for the hills when the workers sat down and said over there. Everyone said, "What about private property?" And John Lewis came and opened his shirt and said, "Shoot me if you will. The right to a man's job is greater than the right to private property." The Civil Rights Movement, we all heard about that. The Vietnam War protests. Get through this faster, or Nancy's going to kill me. The student uprising in Paris, '68. The apartheid divestment, which went on also in Madison, the '80s. The Wisconsin uprising. And global warming. When I went, so anyway, when I got Bill McKibben's letter, I said, "God damn it, I've had enough of this lobbying stuff. I got to try something different." And I went to my son, who at the time was 14 years old, and I said, "I'm going to be dead when the worst hits the fan. You're going to still be here. That's why I'm going to get arrested. You're going to go to the White House and refuse to move and get thrown in jail." And Jed said to me, "Don't bend down in the shower to pick up the soap pop." It was quite an experience. That's me up there in the back. And in front of me is Gus Speth. Gus Speth was chairman of the Council on Environmental Equality under Carter and the United Nations Program on Development. Things. He was 74 years old when he came there, and we were in jail for 3 days. His son, who was a big shot lawyer in D.C., came to get him out, and he told his dad, "I got you up and get you out." And Gus said, "I'm not going out unless everyone else goes out with me." It was quite an experience. And so what Bill has been leading with the 350.org group is the idea of saying to the environmental community, enough is enough. Unless we go out. Sometimes. Always makes me cry.
cannot control 350 million Indians if those Indians refuse to cooperate.
So, sometime expected about December, the State Department will be issuing its national determination to advise the president whether to approve the pipeline. And also there'll be another Enbridge pipeline. 350 has groups all over the country. I'm here with the 350 Madison group. And for those of you in Madison, and there's also going on like in Minnesota, Chicago, all the way around the country, we're going to have training on September 14th here, so you, if you haven't done it before, can be for the first time to risk arrest, to stand up, get out of your comfort zone, because unless we're willing to get out of our comfort zone, we're not going to win. And to make a change and to stand up to say, we don't know if we have a chance on climate change, we won't know for 20 years. But at the damn least, we're going to try and fight. And hopefully we're going to win. So please come to us if you are all interested or potentially interested. There's an email address at the bottom. Send us your email address.
Can't see it here.
350 dot.
Oh, it's just
What
like the
dot
350,
WI?
yeah.
Okay. So if you could just send us an email, and we'll get you the information to come to the training
So
session.
you have a website, 350.org Madison?
Yes. This is the email address.
350.madison.
350.madison.wi@gmail.com. At gmail.com.
So I'd like to introduce you to Daniel Lee, and then we'll hear from Dawn. So please, Daniel, introduce yourself and go for it.
Okay, I was gonna roll a clip as well, but since we're running low on time, we're just gonna skip it. I'll mention it towards the end. It's sort of funny. I was just gonna lighten the mood. My name is Daniel Lee. I'm on the Move to Amend National Leadership Team. I've seen some of you in some workshops already. I'm on the team with Nancy, David Cobb, Egberta Willies, and George Friday, who are here doing workshops here. The way I got involved with Move to Amend actually was through a sustainability convergence I went to in Davis, California about 3 years ago, where I saw Dr. Ricky do a presentation on Move to Amend, and subsequently over the next 2 days, me and Ricky had like 700 conversations. But she had just gotten back from New Orleans and the BP disaster, and she had also been in Alaska for Exxon Valdez and the after effects there. So we talked explicitly about how, even though I had a whole lot of passion for environmental issues and sustainability, none of those issues would be resolved without eliminating corporate power, which is why I mostly work with Move to Amend these days. But I'm from, I live in Southern California, so I'm going to talk about a few local issues there and then a little bit about international solidarity. One of the things that recently happened in Southern California that I think we can count as a win, that doesn't exactly directly relate to Keystone XL, but I'll get back to that in a second. It was the San Onofre nuclear power plant was successfully shut down. Yes. And if you listen to like the CEO of SoCal Edison, he said the continuing uncertainty about when or if songs, which is basically the plant, might return to service was not good for our customers or investors or the need to plan for our region's long-term electricity needs. But he's basically saying it was too expensive for us to wait for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to tell us whether or not we could be open. But what he didn't say is basically the protest that made it too expensive. And I wanted to mention that it's not a very long story because the plant was actually shut down for 17 months following a discovery that it basically had faults that were similar to the faults of Fukushima. And the fact that it's basically very close to the San Andreas fault, which is a more active fault than I think the one that quaked in Japan, meant that it was more serious. And I think we have, even though Japan is very, very dense, we have about 10 million people within 50 miles of San Onofre. I mentioned that to say something that I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about on a panel tomorrow, because one of the biggest things I think the climate movement and the climate justice movement, it needs to be a climate justice movement, needs to do is change the site of protest. I love Bill McKibben, I love 350.org, but when there was an action earlier this year in DC and 50,000 people showed up, we had a similar action in Los Angeles, about 10 or 15,000 people showed up. I hated both of those actions. I thought they were useless. I thought they were a huge waste of time. Partially because they happened on Saturday, but partially because they were at government buildings. And one of the things that I'm going to harp on more tomorrow is, like, if we protest and continue to protest in the future, we need to protest at the true seat of power, which is either at a corporation, or we need to protest and shut things down. Like, I was excited when I was doing research about a panel tomorrow, and I had a conversation with Jill Stein about another issue that I was going to bring up about California. The Richmond refinery in Richmond, California, exploded last year. I think 15,000 people had to be hospitalized or treated as a result. Richmond is a highly concentrated town that's, I think, about 80% people of color. As a result, you know, a lot of, like, environmental regulations and things aren't really paid attention to. And I think Chevron so far has been fined about $2 million. They settled, but the mayor of Richmond, who is actually a Green Party mayor, wants to sue Chevron for more damages, because there was a whole lot more than $2 million of damage done to the community at large. But last weekend, they had a huge protest. It's a fairly small city, where I think about 3,000 to 5,000 of their citizens showed up, and 200 got arrested. And Bill McKibben was one of those people. And he sort of diffused some of the arguments that I was going to make about him. But in general, like, he sort of made the point that I wanted to make. The thing that I like about I Don't Know More and the Keystone XL protest in general is that they're going to try to shut down industry directly and affect their bottom line. Everything else really doesn't matter. We can appeal to our elected representatives all we want. Some of them will listen to us. Most of them are bought. That's just true. So the only real way that we can affect change is to put ourselves in the cogs of the machine and stop their money from flowing. And I really want to focus on that fact. Like, we need to change the site of protest. We don't need to protest at, like, dead government buildings where nobody's there, or even if they are there, they're not going to listen to us anyway. It's a complete waste of time and a waste of effort. We need to be in the way. And I think, I really hope we're in the way more. One of the reasons I bring that up is I've had a lot of intergenerational discussions about Occupy, and a lot of my younger Occupy friends, if you talk about getting a permit, they're like, I'm not coming. But I sort of agree and disagree with that. But earlier this year, I live in Culver City, which is going to transition me back into talking about fracking. But, like, I'm on the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee there, and we put on an event each year and, you know, talk about social issues. We try to talk about MLK from different contexts. But this year we were lucky enough to have 7 Freedom Riders come. And what they said, and most of them were anywhere from, like, 17 to, like, 27 at the time. But what they said at the time is what they were doing was completely illegal at the time. And I want to reiterate that fact to people who, you know, really love having permits all the time and really love, you know, doing things that they allow us to do, because it's like, well, I mean, the laws weren't written by us. They were written to, you know, benefit business and to protect property, and not for the benefit of people. So it's not like we should disregard all laws, but some, you know, very arbitrary laws aren't really, they shouldn't be the focus of our concern. But the lesson from the Freedom Riders was we need to invent new ways to protest. And I think that's what we really need to do in terms of climate change. One of the other things that I experienced at the Sustainability Convergence, where I met Dr. Ricky Ott, is I also met and had another 2-day conversation with Tim DeChristopher. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but he works with an organization called Peaceful Uprising. And he went to jail for approximately 2 years for bidding on these public lands that were being illegally sold to business. You know, falsely bidding. You know, he wasn't able to pay the millions of dollars that he outbid, you know, all of these energy corporations for, and thus he went to jail. even though after the fact, I think the judge even ruled in, I think it was her statement that like the sale was illegal. So what he was doing, you know, I mean, he's still into jail. He's out now. He got out earlier this year, and he's been making the rounds on the networks and things like that. But prior to that, he made a speech at Power Shift that year where he basically said, we need to start being mobile in the climate movement. We need to get more active. We need to get more militant. We need to be on the streets. We don't need to just be talking or advocating or doing anything like that. Because as an example, like I said, I live in Culver City, California, and there are a lot of like oil derricks where we're from. One of the untold stories about California in general is how much of an oil area it is, particularly Southern California, particularly Los Angeles. But they're trying to convert those oil derricks into fracking mines. And even though our Culver City City Council unanimously voted against it, they don't really have the sway because part of the derricks are in unincorporated part of the city, and part of them are in Culver City. We're working on a ballot initiative to put it on the ballot and before the people, but that's really more or less just a tactic to get the word out to more people. What we're really going to have to do is sort of what they did at San Onofre to get ourselves out there and put our bodies on the line. But the one thing I wanted to mention about San Onofre that was going to get me to my last point is that the reason that the San Onofre protests were so successful, in my opinion, was one, because Fukushima Daiichi, that disaster happened. So there was an awareness about nuclear power. It's been sort of this sleeping sort of nuclear giant, like about to explode for years because they don't update the plants and whatever. But not just the disaster, the resultant protest in Japan, which for months and months happened in huge numbers in Japan, unseen in decades in Japan. And I think, at least amongst the activists and organizers I know, that huge outpouring from people that are culturally, I don't want to say meek, but culturally that's not what Japanese people do. Like, they don't get out into the streets, they don't make a fuss. They're nice. If they don't like you, they might tell you, but you know, they're not violent people, they're not protesty people. So that type of display is what invigorated people in Southern California. And I mention that because I feel like more and more we need to think of the environmental movement in terms of international solidarity. And I think that's what I Don't Know More basically got people thinking about. Because the pictures that I saw the most and the pictures that moved me the most were these long lines of indigenous people, and they actually reminded me of Wisconsin, but these long lines of indigenous people in the snow all day, you know, just making their point, making sure that they're heard, you know, and it's like partially because I'm from the South and I live in California. I'm like, snow? No, I'm not doing that.
Just come to one of our winter protests.
Respectfully decline. But that type of show, not only like it's inspiring, but once you connect the dots, like many people have mentioned before, all of those pipelines go from Canada through the U.S. And they affect us all. And those pipelines are, you know, sort of emblematic of everything else. Because all of the radiation from Fukushima was in California like weeks later. Like it was there that quick. The jet stream makes everything travel. All of the pollution that's in China, particularly in Beijing, we get in California all the time. Everything is connected. We need to see the environmental movement and the environmental struggle as an international struggle. The last thing I sort of just wanted to mention, because I sort of wanted to end on that point, but I got rambly, is that one of the things that I've read the most about Keystone XL that I thought was the most revealing is that Forbes magazine, which is not, you know, a radical liberal tone, did a very in-depth series of articles on pipelines. And the one that resonated with me the most, they were surprisingly critical. The one that resonated with me the most was they were looking at pipelines from a business perspective. And the basic conclusion was pipelines leak, period. Keystone XL is going to leak. The reason that pipelines leak is the same reason that nuclear facilities get cracked And it's the same reason that our grid, our electrical grid in the United States is way behind any industrialized country in the world. Businesses invest initially. Once they get their profit, which is usually within the first 5 to 10 years, they don't care. So the pipelines will leak. It's not even a question. It's not a question. We don't need people to do studies to tell us whether or not they're safe. They will leak. The indigenous lands will be destroyed. Our water supplies will be destroyed. It's all about profit, and we need to talk about them in that context. The same with the nuclear plants. Doing a little research for today, I found out that I think about half of our nuclear facilities in this country are on fault lines. Mm-hmm. And I think the percentage is higher for the last time these same facilities were updated, was about 50 years ago. So we have a lot of really compelling evidence that these decaying fossil fuel and nuclear technologies are not good for us. And we have evidence that these industries are only out for profit no matter what they say about environmental consciousness. So what we really need to do is just get our bodies out there and disrupt them. And we've seen successes, like Keystone XL should have been finished a long time ago. If SoCal Edison had its way, San Onofre would be open. Unfortunately, because the Japanese government is also in the pocket of the industry, a lot of their reactors were turned back on, I think late last year or early this year. But that's no reason to stop getting out there, because we are in a climate crisis, and we're seeing all of these new things like fracking and going back to nuclear as clean energy as results of what Naomi Klein calls disaster capitalism. They know we're at the end, so they're trying to do the most risky stuff to continue making money. And we have to make that obvious, and we have to put our bodies on the line so that other people will join us.
So I'd like to, just a second, see your hand. I'd like to just end with Dawn. Can you introduce yourself, Dawn, and be efficient with time, perhaps?
Yes,
Because,
I just want to...
Just a second, because then I'd like to just have some popcorn questions. We'll take a number of questions and then have the panel sort of quickly answer your questions, and then I'd like to just have a couple of wrap-up comments. So let's take another maybe 5, 8, 10 minutes if you could stay. Is that possible? Okay, thank you very much.
And I'm only going to take like 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. So, first of all, I just wanted to show you, I'm wearing 2 hats today. One is with the Wisconsin Grassroots Network, and the other is, can someone just hold this for a second? And the other is with Call for Peace Drum and Dance Company. We did the opening on page 34 in the Rotunda to start off this event. I wanted to say that the Wisconsin Grassroots Network, first of all, is the coming together in our state, across the state, of small groups on the ground, working together with efforts, especially around the sand mining that's taking place. And recently, this network just pulled together this event, and I want to name the film that they showed that was just excellent, showing how this sand mining is being hauled away. This is the amount of sand that's being hauled away in our state of Wisconsin. And the film is called Stealing.
The Price of Sand.
Yeah, The Price of Sand, I'm sorry. And Mary, you probably know about, is that available online?
Yes.
Yes. Price of Sand, if you want to write that down. It's a very well done film, really letting you know how this sand is not just happening in our state, but across the country and actually globally. The other thing I want to mention is when Carl mentioned up in northern Wisconsin 23 years ago, during our fishing and treaty rights issues in northern Wisconsin, there was a big issue. And also he mentioned the Crandon mine. There was a man by the name of Nick Hawkins who just passed away this last year. And at that time, he was the one that stood on the boat landings withstood all the racial unrest in this state. The Wisconsin State Journal covered it day by day for nearly a month, and he was really known as an Adichie, a peace warrior that talked about what is called Ashkeabama Zing, a new people will emerge. And he did a poster at that time during treaty rights talking about what this exactly means, and it's Jibaway prophecy. And we talked about it in the opening in the rotunda, and if you want to know, if you would like a little flyer on that, I have those to pick up. But it basically means a new people will emerge, and we will have a choice between two roads. One road of the unsustainable technology of greed, or the other road to spirituality where there's a reverence for all life in the planet. All things are connected, and we need to do this for our children and our children's children. So with that, you can pick this up. The New People site, newpeople.net, is under construction now as we speak, with a team of people of all cultures coming together. It'll be a global educational, cultural resource that when you talk about connecting the dots of the good works that's being done across this country and globally, it'll be at least one source that you can go to and find out what's going on in terms of movements, organization, films, books, publications. And it'll be an excellent site for education that'll connect you not only globally, but also what's happening in Indian country in terms of the efforts that Native Americans are doing through Idle No More and other kinds of things that Native people do. There's excellent resources, so you'll be able to find those when you go to newpeople.net. So that's it.
Thank you very much. So let's have a couple of questions, yes?
Okay, yeah, I have a quick comment and then a
We'll just take questions unless you want to direct it to one person.
Yes,
I see,
I'd
okay.
like to direct it to Daniel. I agree wholeheartedly with what you said about instead of lobbying politicians who we know are bought and paid for, going to the real source of power, which is the corporate money. And I just wanted to mention that on Sunday morning, I'm with the Wisconsin Wave, and we have a workshop on a divestment campaign that we were running against the state's Chamber of Commerce, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, which currently owns all three branches of state government in Wisconsin. So my really encourage everyone to come to that workshop. It's 11 a.m. on Sunday, and my question for you is, what do you think about the strategy of running divestment campaigns against the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and its state affiliates?
Well, we talked about this a little in an earlier session I did. I think Liberty Tree and US Uncut also have like the stopthechamber.org. Shutthechamber.org. I like those campaigns. I think if you do those campaigns alone, it's not enough. But I think those campaigns are awesome, and I yeah, that's about all. Yeah.
Yes?
I'm from Arkansas, and in Arkansas we had at Mayflower, we had the Mayflower oil spill, which was tar sacks. And then we also have, where I live, is Russellville with the nuclear power plants. So I'm like in the center point of everything. And I was wondering if anybody had ever thought of going to a place like Arkansas, where you have all of these same issues that are environmental, basically atrocities that can happen at any moment, and basically doing a study of the people's attitudes toward them, how it might be able to change the people's attitudes toward them, because most people in Russellville have lived with the nuclear plant for so long that their thought is it's safe, nothing has ever happened, until 2 or 3 weeks ago, while they were trying to change a generator out, one of the generators fell and killed one person and injured several other at the moment. Well, then the question started being asked of, well, is it too old? Why were they having to change this out? And those kind of things. I mean, I know it's just Arkansas, but it seems like it's like the melting pot of crud.
Yes, well.
Well, I love Arkansas, but I'm just saying it's like the environmental, they just allowed pork producers to let runoff go into the Buffalo River. I mean, we have issues in that state that are really environmentally destructive for our children and even our elderly. So that's one of my questions.
Does anybody want to answer?
Anybody want to take that big old mess of stuff?
Yeah.
I've worked with some of the people in Arkansas regarding frac sand mining along with hydraulic fracturing and along with the idea of pushing their waste into the soil, creating the earthquakes.
Exactly.
But you know, I haven't heard much from them lately, and it's almost like they've been through the mill. They fought it and they fought it and they fought it.
There's no support system
And
in
it's just
Arkansas
so
because everybody
difficult.
goes, it's the South, they'll never change, just let them do
Right,
it
and
on
that,
their own.
but I think we could take that same attitude here in Wisconsin. That's
Yeah.
that's why networking is just so important, because we need to lift each other up. We
Right.
need to encourage and get people to realize that nothing will happen unless we have people supporting each other and working on it.
Right, well, the one thing about the Pegasus pipeline is we've now found out that there were studies done on the Pegasus pipeline decades ago that proved that it was not structurally safe to do not to push anything through. It was not structurally safe. So what do? They switch it from a gas pipeline to a tar sands pipeline that is sending silica straight through everything. Now our Lake Conway is contaminated. The school systems are contaminated. There are 12 houses that are uninhabitable. Though Exxon will tell you that you can live in those houses.
Yeah.
But you saw rivers of tar sands in their backyards and down their highways.
Well, I was going to say, maybe we should talk about, a little about that afterwards to get other people's
Okay,
questions.
sorry.
But in general, my response was going to be like, the environmental movement needs to be more focused on environmental justice, and a lot of things like you talk about, I'm from the South as well, happen in low income or people of color
Exactly, they're
communities.
just
And
discounted.
that's why it's discounted, so we need to connect those
Exactly.
dots
Right.
more so that people around the country see that it's happening in someone else's community.
Also, I think you're bringing up an example of how our consciousness is normal. These situations become normal.
Yes,
And we settle because it looks normal.
right.
And that's the effort of the industry to normalize it.
Just to normalize
And
it.
government to treat it as a normal, for, not to have us protest and
Right.
resist. So we also have to sort of get out of that sense that this is normal and we should accept this.
Exactly.
And mobilize and
Well,
get out of
and
that passive mode.
and
So
there's-
let's take another question, yes?
Yes, Peter, I was in jail for 2 days with Kippen and others in August 2 years ago in D.C. And
Hi.
I hate to say that, I'm so pleased that you're talking about Gandhi, but as far as I can tell, no one in the climate justice movement has a real proper understanding of what Gandhi really stands for. And Gandhi really has a lot of potential power that we're missing because we won't really look at what he stands for. Will you talk with me?
I've been talking, in terms of what Daniel is arguing, I've been arguing the same thing.
Will you talk with me so you can hear what my
Oh, sure.
criticism is rather than bothering these folks?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay,
Rachel?
this is for Carl, okay, about the mine.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about how close the mine is to Lake Superior, specifically to the Bayfield and Apostle Islands, and what they represent to the state?
Bayfield is up here, the mine is here. It's about a 1 hour drive between the mine and Bayfield, and the Apostle Islands is a national lakeshore for those who aren't familiar. It's a tourist destination. In terms of from Lake Superior, the phase 1 of the mine site is 6 miles from the southeast border of the Bad River Ojibwe Reservation, but that doesn't really get at the distance downstream. It's probably 30 miles or so upstream of Lake Superior and the Kakagan Sloughs. In Minnesota has the Mesabi Iron Range, which has been produced a tremendous amount. The majority of iron that's come out of the United States has come out of the Mesabi Range. And where the Embarrass River, where the river that drains a lot of the range flows into the St. Louis River. The St. Louis River drains from northern Minnesota down southwest and then down out into Lake Superior at Duluth. There is a wild rice dead zone that stretches from where the Embarrass River enters with the mine runoff down to the estuary on Lake Superior. It's 100 miles long.
Wow.
That's 100 miles. Upstream of the Embarrass River on the St. Louis, the river is covered nearly shore to shore with wild rice in the summer and early fall. And where that river enters, the rice stops. And there's no rice 100 miles downstream. The fish in that river have consumption advisories because of mercury contamination. You're not supposed to, if you're pregnant, you're not supposed to eat any fish out of the St. Louis River or estuary. If you're, you're supposed to limit to 1 fish a month or something like that. If you're otherwise, that's the sort of surface water pollution that a mine like this is capable of generating, and it's only 20 or 30 miles from Lake Superior, and upstream of the entire water source of the Bad River Reservation, and a lot of farms in this area. There's a farm literally across the road from the site called Odavero Farm, which has been supporting the harvest camp by providing donations of their locally produced meat and stuff like that. And that's one thing that that camp has been very, very important for, is reaching out to local people and making the point that, you know, the jobs thing that Pat mentioned, that argument is being pushed by mine proponents. There's more jobs in this area that will be lost if this mine goes through. There's 400 logging jobs in the town of Mellon that are jeopardized if they don't have enough clean water to run their mills and enough land to log. There are farms in the area that if their well water gets contaminated, they're done. There's tourism. So, thanks.
So Rachel?
Well, I just wanted to make sort of a little bit of a comment, I guess. I think that, you know, there is a climate justice movement that is not 350.org. 350.org is, you know, Bill McKibben has worked really hard to raise awareness about the problem of climate change, but without advocating any particular policy positions as far as what the solutions are, which means a lot of people got very concerned and worried about climate and then gone out and advocated for a lot of false solutions, including the climate legislation, the cap and trade legislation that you referred to earlier. But I think the other point of that is like keeping the focus on the root of the problem. With Keystone XL, people organizing all along the length and traverse of the pipelines has really been great. But if the pipelines aren't built, they will carry that oil by rail, and that's what happened in Dr. Gentic a few weeks ago. We saw the consequences. And the industry knows that. They're hoping the pipelines will get passed, but they've been buying up interest in rail and have the capacity to do a lot of rail transport. So keeping the focus on the extraction of the tar sands, not the pipeline itself, I think is really key.
Thank you, Rachel. One more question.
I was also, I couldn't hear everything you said then, but I was wondering, you know, they've got the Enbridge Eastern Gulf pipeline that's going to go through the Mississippi and then parallel the KXL, and it's a gas line that's now being retrofitted for Bittman. And so I just wondered, is there any movement to like be focused on that along with the KXL?
As far as I know, unfortunately, like Rachel just said, a lot of the national attention is on Keystone XL. One of the things that I was going to mention before we ran out of time is like beyond this area, a lot of people don't know about the original Enbridge spill in Kalamazoo, partially because it happened like shortly after Deepwater Horizon happened, and Deepwater Horizon got all of the news. And I feel like there's been a lot of action that's focus just on Keystone XL, which is a problem, and not as much. Well, there's been a lot of action focused on Keystone XL on one hand, and then there's been a lot of action focused on fracking, particularly in Pennsylvania, on the other hand, when we have pipelines, as that map showed, all across the country, and fracking happens in almost every state in the country, or it's trying to happen in every state in the country. So there unfortunately isn't a lot of focus, and there needs to be local
That's right.
activism and
No,
organizing.
there is.
That's right.
Number of states have formed groups in a local area. We're now working to make a coalition of the multi-states. Come and talk to me afterwards.
Yeah, we have Frack Free Tennessee, and we have a conference in Knoxville on the 13th through the 15th, just for your information.
I mean, we're doing a huge fight back against this proposed pipeline across New York, and you know, with the tar sands pipeline now coming east, and Sherri was saying across the indigenous lands or across Maine, we're doing a huge amount of organizing around that. So, you know, I know it's harder in some areas than others, but I'll just say again, don't presume who will and will not support you.
Yeah. Right.
You may be surprised.
And I think we just need to coalesce against the extractive practices. Right.
So I would just like to thank the panelists very much. The amount of time for this discussion of this issue is sufficient, considering that we could spend hours and days. But I'd like to just say that I think what Pat's presentation and the others, but Pat's in particular and Carl's, shows that we have to focus on the externalities, that we really have to look at the impact on people and health and foodways of the impact of people and other aspects of, for example, the transportation of the fracking sands all over the country and the CO2 that produces in the transportation. So we have to look at the whole production stream, the whole transportation stream, all the externalities, and not just look at the fight in the community, but we have to look at the entire impact of that particular industry.
We're not an externality.
We're not an externality. I think that Carl represents a wonderful connection between sort of urban and rural, what's happening with the kind of support that people living in Madison can give the community where the mining is occurring, and really make that connection, make that link, and bring the education from that community into the urban groups to build that coalition. Ruth has shown us that you have to work across all sectors. You can't presume that you don't have an ally in any one sector, but to work across cultural, ethnic, tribal, party lines to really seek out people that you can ally with and work with with great profit and with great energy. And Daniel has shown Peter has shown that movements in the past have won, and that you have to be really committed, and you have to not just think about the issue and know the facts, but you have to really put your body on the line. And I think that Daniel, in showing us the local and global connection with the nuclear energy and with Fukushima, leads me to let you know that there is a new effort going to be made. There's a new website, a Global Climate Convergence, that is looking toward local, national, and global actions in the next year. First building from Earth Day 2014 to May Day 2014 with local, national, and global actions. And you can pick this up at the table. And there's a website up now, globalclimateconvergence.org. Do come tomorrow from 2 to 4. We have the last panel of the Earth Democracy Conference titled Next Stage, Powering Up for People, Peace, and the Planet. It will be a discussion of all the panelists and the audience in a collaborative discussion of what we do next to get to a comprehensive global climate convergence and to really bring the power of every individual together in fighting back against corporations and politicians who won't do anything for the people and the planet. Thank you very much.
You're the one who talked about the Seabrook stories? Yeah. I remember.
I went to the wrong conference apparently, because this is what I wanted to hear about.